The tow truck was already hooking a cable onto my pickup, and the person standing there pointing, ordering it to tow my truck away, was the HOA Karen. I stood frozen on my front porch for a few seconds. The morning sun had just begun to rise, not yet strong enough to burn away the thin layer of dew covering the grass. Everything had been quiet, familiar, just like every other morning in this neighborhood, until I heard the sharp clank of metal and the heavy rumble of the tow truck's engine. My old pickup sat there in front of the driveway, the steel cable already looped underneath the frame. A man in a reflective vest was preparing to raise the lift, and standing beside him was Karen, hands on her hips, face tight with tension. The kind of expression worn by people who believe they hold authority simply because they think they know the rules. She pointed straight at my truck. "Tow it away. It violates HOA rules." I stepped slowly down the front steps. My heart was not racing, but inside my head there was a familiar feeling. That strange awareness when you realize something is about to turn into one of those HOA Karen stories people tell online. Except this time, I was standing right in the middle of it. I spoke up. "Excuse me, what exactly is going on with my truck?" The tow truck driver turned around. He looked a little uncomfortable, but Karen answered for him. "That truck is not allowed to be parked outside the driveway. It makes the neighborhood look bad." I called the tow truck. She said it like she was the sheriff of the entire area. I looked at my pickup, an old Ford, the paint faded after years of sun and weather, scratches along the truck bed, but the engine still ran strong. And more importantly, it had been sitting there for years. 6 years. 6 years that truck had been parked in that exact spot. Not a single person had complained, until Karen moved into the neighborhood. I stepped closer to the tow truck. "Hey, buddy. Are you about to tow my vehicle?" The driver looked at me, then looked at Karen. Karen answered immediately. "Yes. This is an order from the HOA. Just tow it." I turned toward her. "Which HOA order would that be?" Karen crossed her arms. "HOA rules prohibit large trucks from being parked outside. They must be kept inside the garage." I looked her straight in the eyes. "My garage is a workshop. I repair things in there." She shrugged. "That is not my problem." A few neighboring doors began to open. People stood on their porches pretending to water plants or check their mail, but in reality they were watching. Neighborhoods with an HOA are always like this. Everything stays quiet until a Karen decides to turn it into a performance. I turned back toward my pickup. That truck was not just transportation. It had been with me for many years after I left the military. It hauled lumber, carried tools, helped neighbors whenever they needed a hand. Once I even used it to help an elderly couple move out at the end of the street. To Karen, that truck might look old and worn out, but to me, it was part of my life after the war. Karen spoke again, her voice sharp like a blade. "I do not have all day. Tow the truck." The tow truck driver hesitated. He looked at me again. I could see him trying to decide who actually had authority here. Karen stepped forward and pointed directly at my vehicle. "That truck violates the standards of this neighborhood. The HOA does not allow things like that." I took a slow breath. "Karen, could you show me the rule that says that?" She stayed silent for a second. Then she said, "I have read it." I nodded. "Good. Then you must know exactly what page it is on." Karen blinked. Just for a brief moment, but I saw the hesitation. A neighbor across the street quietly said to his wife, "This sounds just like one of those HOA Karen stories on Reddit." I almost laughed, because I was thinking the exact same thing. Karen cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "You do not need to know the details. The HOA board has already approved it." I looked around the neighborhood. I had lived here long enough to know nearly everyone on the HOA board, and I was pretty sure they had never once discussed my truck. I turned back to the tow truck driver. "Hey, did you receive any paperwork authorizing this tow?" He shook his head slightly. "Just a service call." Karen immediately cut in. "You do not need paperwork. I am part of the HOA." I looked at her for a long moment. A soft breeze moved through the quiet street. Leaves rustled along the pavement. And somewhere in my mind, a thought appeared. Karen believed she was in control of the situation. She believed I was just an old man with a beat-up truck. But there was something she did not know. Something no one else in this neighborhood knew. At least not yet. That truck was not the only thing with a past. The man standing in front of her had one too. Karen took another step forward and placed her hand on the control lever of the tow truck as if she were the one driving it. Tow it away right now. The air on the street suddenly felt heavy. The tow truck driver paused. His hand was still resting on the steel cable, but he did not tighten it any further. He looked at Karen, then looked at me, as if trying to figure out who actually had the authority to give orders here. Karen took a deep breath. Her voice rose slightly, sharper than before. I already told you, this is an HOA rule. Large trucks like that are not allowed to be parked outside the driveway. She turned toward me, her eyes full of open contempt. How long have you lived here, and you still do not understand the rules? I looked straight into her eyes. 6 years. I said it slowly. This truck has been here for 6 years. Karen gave a small smirk. The kind of half-smile people wear when they believe they have just found someone else's weakness. Then you should know better. The HOA has standards for how this neighborhood should look. She gestured around the street. Neatly cut lawns. Rows of trees trimmed perfectly straight. Houses painted in neutral colors, so similar that if you walked through the neighborhood at night you might mistake your own house for your neighbor's. A tightly controlled neighborhood. A neighborhood Karen clearly enjoyed controlling. That truck does not belong in this community, she said. It makes the place look like a construction site. I looked back at my pickup. The blue paint had faded. A few scratches along the truck bed. An old towing hook at the back. It was not new, not shiny, not luxurious. But it was honest. It worked. Unlike many other things in this neighborhood, a neighbor across the street whispered to the person beside him, "Oh God, another Karen." The other person replied quietly, "I see HOA stories like this online all the time." Karen heard them but ignored it. She turned back to the tow truck driver. "What are you waiting for?" The driver scratched the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I just want to make sure this vehicle actually needs to be towed." Karen crossed her arms. "I represent the HOA." Her voice hardened. "Are you questioning my authority?" The driver looked at me, then back at Karen. "I just need confirmation." Karen shook her head with irritation. "I called the service. I told them this vehicle is in violation. You are being paid to tow it away." The tension in the air stretched tight like a wire. I stepped closer to my truck. "Karen," I said, "could you show me exactly which rule prohibits this vehicle?" She exhaled sharply. "I did not bring the rule book with me." I nodded. "Then you must remember where it is written." Karen fell silent for a moment. Just one moment. But in that brief silence, I saw the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. One of the neighbors standing near the mailbox spoke quietly. "I have lived here for 10 years. I have never seen that rule." Another neighbor replied, "This sounds exactly like those HOA Karen stories on Reddit." Karen snapped her head toward them. "This does not concern you." Then she pointed at my pickup. "That vehicle looks like junk. It ruins the appearance of this neighborhood." I looked down at my shoes for a second. Then I looked back up. "You know something," I said slowly. "That truck has helped at least 10 families in this neighborhood move their homes. It hauled lumber for Mr. Harris when he repaired his porch. It carried boxes for Mrs. Linda when her husband passed away and she had to move out." Karen shrugged. "I do not care." The words dropped onto the quiet street like a heavy stone. I do not care. That was the kind of person Karen was. Rules were just an excuse. Power was what she really wanted. Karen turned back to the tow truck driver. "That is enough. Tow the vehicle." The driver let out a quiet breath. He stepped closer to the truck. He bent down and looked underneath the frame. Then he stood back up. He looked at me again, this time for longer. His eyes settled on my face, as if he was trying to connect an old memory with the man standing in front of him. Karen began to lose patience. "What are you waiting for?" The driver did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly walked around the pickup. His hand brushed lightly across the faded paint on the truck bed. Then he looked up at me. His eyes narrowed slightly. as if a piece of memory had suddenly lit up inside his mind. He opened his mouth, hesitated. Then he asked a question that made the entire street fall silent. "Were you in the military?" The driver's question made the entire street fall silent. "Were you in the military?" Karen blinked, clearly confused about why the conversation had suddenly shifted in that direction. She folded her arms tighter, irritation spreading across her face. "What does that have to do with this vehicle?" I looked at the driver for a few seconds. His eyes were no longer the eyes of someone simply following an order to tow a car. They were the eyes of a man trying to pull a distant memory back into the present. I gave a small nod. Yes, just one word, but it was enough for something in the air to change. The driver stepped a little closer. He studied my face carefully, then glanced down at the truck, then looked at me again. He spoke slowly. "You served in Iraq, didn't you?" Karen let out an impatient breath. "I do not have time for your war stories." She turned toward the tow truck. "Tow the vehicle right now." But the driver did not move. He kept looking at me, as if trying to piece together fragments of an old memory. I nodded. "Iraq. A long time ago." A light breeze passed through the street. Leaves rustled along the pavement. A few neighbors stepped closer, curious. The driver frowned slightly. "Which unit?" I told him the name of the unit. Just 3 words. But the moment I said them, the driver's face changed. He straightened up. His eyes widened. "That cannot be possible." Karen was now visibly irritated. "What are you two even talking about? This is an HOA issue." No one answered her. The driver took another step closer. "You drove a Humvee, didn't you?" I allowed a faint smile. "I did." The driver exhaled slowly. "My God." Karen stamped her foot. "Enough. Tow that vehicle right now." The driver turned his head toward her. For the first time during the entire conversation, his eyes looked completely different. No hesitation. No uncertainty. "Calm down," he said. "I just need to confirm something." Karen almost shouted. "You do not need to confirm anything. You are being paid to tow the vehicle." The driver turned back toward me. His voice lowered. "Do you remember an explosion near Fallujah?" Those words pulled a distant memory back to the surface. A dusty red road. A convoy of vehicles. An explosion tearing through the air. I looked at him longer. Then I nodded. "Yes." The driver swallowed. He continued. "A Humvee caught on fire. There was a soldier trapped inside." Karen crossed her arms. "I do not care about any of this." But no one was listening to her anymore. The driver looked at me as if he were staring at a ghost from the past. "You forced the door open. You pulled that soldier out before the vehicle exploded again." A few neighbors began exchanging glances. The atmosphere shifted. Karen still did not understand. She said sharply, "This is not a war movie. This is a residential neighborhood." The driver turned toward her. "Mom." His voice was very calm. "I need to say this." Karen shook her head. "No. You need to tow that vehicle." The driver looked back at me. "Do you remember that soldier?" I looked at him. Then I shook my head. "No. War leaves behind too many faces. You cannot remember them all." He smiled faintly. "I remember." He raised a hand and pointed at his own chest. "That soldier was me." A heavy silence settled over the street. One neighbor quietly exhaled. "Oh my God." Karen looked back and forth between the two of us. She let out a mocking laugh. "So what?" The driver turned fully toward her. "It means I am not towing this vehicle." Karen froze. "What did you say?" "I said I am not towing this vehicle." She stepped closer. "You are being paid. You have a contract." The driver shook his head. "There is no legal paperwork. There is no official request from the HOA. There was only a phone call from a woman claiming the vehicle was in violation." Karen's face turned red. "I represent the HOA." The driver looked her straight in the eyes. "Mom," he said slowly, "this man pulled me out of a burning vehicle. If he wants to park that truck here for the rest of his life, I will not be the one towing it away." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out for several seconds. Then she turned toward me, anger burning in her eyes. "Who do you think you are?" I looked at her. "Just a neighbor." I said. A neighbor with an old truck. Karen gave a cold laugh. We will see what the HOA board has to say about this. She spun around and pulled out her phone. But there was one thing Karen still did not understand. This story. It had only just begun. Karen made the call right in the middle of the street, her voice loud and urgent, as if the entire neighborhood had just committed a serious crime. Within minutes, she was declaring that I would regret daring to challenge the HOA. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted noticeably. People were no longer standing far away watching. A few stepped closer. Several phones were raised. Neighborhoods with HOAs are always like this. When drama starts, it spreads fast, like fire catching dry wind. Karen turned her back to us and walked a few steps toward the middle of the road while talking on the phone. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and tense. Yes, the truck is still here. I already called the tow service, but the driver refused. I need the HOA board to handle this immediately. She paused for a moment, then continued, her voice even louder. No, I do not care who he is. I leaned casually against the bed of my truck. The old pickup made a faint metallic sound as I rested against it. A familiar feeling, rough, honest. The tow truck driver stood beside me. He watched Karen for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. He spoke quietly. She has no idea what she is doing. I gave a faint smile. Most Karens do not. The driver glanced around the neighborhood. A few neighbors nodded at me when our eyes met. Mr. Harris stood in front of his yard with his hands on his hips. Mrs. Linda stood near the mailbox, her expression both worried and irritated. Karen was still on the phone. The driver lowered his voice. Have you lived here long? 6 years, I answered. He nodded. I see. He looked at my truck again. You have had this vehicle for a long time, have not you? I placed my hand along the edge of the truck bed. Much longer than 6 years. Karen suddenly turned around. Her face was red with anger. All right, she said loudly. We will handle this the proper way. She pointed directly at me. The HOA board is on the way. A few neighbors exchanged glances. Someone whispered quietly, "Oh God," she actually called the board. Karen heard it and responded immediately. That is right. And when they arrive, that vehicle will be towed. She turned toward the driver. You will still do your job. The driver did not answer right away. He looked at me, then back at Karen. Mom, he said slowly, I already told you, I am not towing this vehicle. Karen gave a cold laugh. You do not get to decide that. You are just a tow truck driver. The driver shrugged. Maybe, he said. But I also have the right to refuse an illegal request. Karen stepped closer, her eyes sharp as knives. You are refusing service after accepting the call. The driver nodded. Yes. Karen let out a mocking laugh. Fine. Then your company will be hearing about this. The driver exhaled slowly. If they hear the whole story, I think they will be just fine with it. Karen turned toward me. And you, she said. Do you think you just won? I looked at her calmly. I never thought this was a competition. Karen smirked. You should start worrying. The HOA board does not like people who break the rules. I did not respond, because I knew something Karen did not. Karen believed the HOA board would stand on her side. She believed I was just an old man living alone with an old truck. But Karen did not understand the history of this neighborhood. She did not know who had lived here longer. She also did not know who had once sat in those HOA meetings many years ago. Karen kept talking. When the board arrives, we will deal with this immediately. A car slowly turned the corner of the street. A gray sedan. Then another car behind it. Mr. Harris spoke quietly. Looks like they are here. Karen turned around, her expression full of triumph. Say, she said. Now we will see who is right. The two cars stopped near the curb. Doors opened. 3 people stepped out. Members of the HOA board. Karen immediately walked toward them, with confidence written all over her face. I remained where I was, standing beside my truck. A light breeze moved through the quiet street. I looked at the people who had just stepped out of the cars. One of them saw me. He stopped walking. His eyes widened. Then he said something that Karen was completely unprepared to hear. What is he doing here? The man from the HOA board stepped out of the car, saw me, and immediately stopped. He did not look at Karen. He did not look at the tow truck. He was only looking at me, as if he had just seen someone he never expected to appear in a situation like this. He spoke slowly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. What is he doing here? Karen turned around, her face full of confidence. Good. You arrived at the perfect time. She quickly walked toward the HOA board and pointed at my pickup as if she were pointing at evidence in a crime. That truck is violating neighborhood rules. I already called a tow truck, but the driver refused to cooperate. I need the HOA board to handle this immediately. The man still had not taken his eyes off me. He frowned slightly. Karen did not notice. She kept talking, her voice growing louder. That vehicle breaks the community appearance standards. It has been parked outside the driveway for far too long. It makes the neighborhood look like a construction site. Two other members of the HOA board stepped closer. An older man and a gray-haired woman. They looked at the pickup, then they looked at me. Then they looked at Karen. Karen crossed her arms, still confident. I have read the rule book. The HOA does not allow vehicles like that. The first man on the board finally spoke. Karen, he said, you called us here for this. Karen nodded firmly. Yes. He turned toward the truck, then turned toward me, and a very faint smile appeared on his face. Karen did not notice. She kept speaking. We need to enforce the rules. If we allow one vehicle like this, tomorrow there will be 10 more. A few neighbors quietly laughed. The gray-haired woman on the HOA board looked at Karen. Which rule exactly do you believe this vehicle is violating? Karen answered immediately. Large trucks are not allowed to be parked outside the driveway. The woman glanced at the man beside her. Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris shook his head. There is no such rule. Karen blinked. There is. Mr. Harris said calmly. There is not. Karen turned toward the first man. You must know that. The man slowly exhaled. Karen, he said, do you know who the man standing next to that truck is? Karen turned to look at me. She shrugged. Someone violating HOA rules. A few quiet chuckles rose from the neighbors. The man from the HOA board gently shook his head. No, he said. He is the person who helped write the first HOA rules for this neighborhood. The entire street suddenly fell silent. Karen froze. She looked at me again. This time her expression was completely different. The earlier contempt was gone. Only confusion remained. She shook her head. That cannot be possible. The man from the board continued. He also served on the HOA board for many years. Karen opened her mouth but could not say anything. The gray-haired woman nodded. I remember clearly, she said. He was the one who added the clause protecting work vehicles into the HOA rules. Karen turned sharply toward her. What? The woman explained. Trucks used for work or community service are allowed to be parked outside the driveway. Karen turned toward me. Her face flushed red. You never told anyone that. I gave a small shrug. You never asked. One neighbor burst out laughing. Mr. Harris spoke. That truck helped half this neighborhood repair their homes. Mrs. Linda added. It also helped me move my things after my husband passed away. Karen stood in the middle of the street, her eyes moving from one person to another. The confidence she had earlier was slowly fading. But Karen was still not ready to back down. She said, but that vehicle still makes the neighborhood look worse. The man from the HOA board sighed. Karen, he said, HOA rules do not exist to serve one person's personal feelings. They exist to protect the community. Karen tightened her grip on her phone. What about the tow truck then? She said. We already called it. The tow truck driver standing beside me spoke for the first time since the HOA board arrived. Mom, he said, I think today I will not be towing any vehicles here. Karen turned toward him, furious. You will have to explain that to your company. The driver shrugged. I am ready to do that. Karen looked around. She suddenly realized something she had never expected before. The entire street. Not a single person was on her side. And the thing that bothered Karen the most was not the truck. It was the fact that the man she believed was just an ordinary old neighbor. was actually one of the people who understood the HOA rules better than anyone else in the neighborhood. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the street for a few seconds. Then she laughed. But it was not the confident laugh she had at the beginning. It was the strained laugh of someone who had just realized the ground beneath her feet was no longer steady. She shook her head. That cannot be possible. Karen's eyes moved from one person to another, as if searching for someone who would confirm that this whole situation was just a misunderstanding, but no one spoke. Mr. Harris stood with his arms crossed. Mrs. Linda gently shook her head. The tow truck driver stood beside my truck, silent, his expression calm. Karen suddenly turned toward me. "You never said you were on the HOA board before." Her voice was sharp and tense. I looked at her. "You never asked." Karen opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. The man from the HOA board, Mr. Carter, stepped forward. "Karen," he said slowly, "we need to talk for a moment." Karen turned toward him. "This is not complicated." She pointed at my truck. "That vehicle makes the neighborhood look worse. We have community standards." Mr. Carter exhaled lightly. "Karen," he said, "HOA rules are not tools for removing things we personally dislike." Karen immediately pushed back. "But we have the right to protect the neighborhood's appearance." The gray-haired woman on the board spoke up. "Yes, but not by inventing rules." Karen blinked. "I am not inventing anything." Mr. Harris shook his head. "Karen, I have lived here for 10 years. I have read the rule book at least 10 times. He pointed toward my pickup. "That truck is completely legal." A neighbor behind him spoke quietly. "And it helped repair my roof last year." Another neighbor added, "It pulled my car out of a muddy ditch last winter." Karen turned sharply toward them. "You are all making this personal." I spoke for the first time since the HOA board had arrived. "Karen." She turned toward me. Her eyes were still full of anger, but now there was also a trace of unease. "I do not want this to become something bigger." Karen gave a mocking laugh. "Too late." I looked at my truck. The morning sunlight reflected across the faded paint. There was a long scratch along the side of the truck bed. It had been there for many years. From a day far away, in a place with no HOA, no quiet neighborhood, only dust, smoke, and explosions. The tow truck driver beside me spoke softly. "You still kept it." I nodded. He looked at the truck as if he were looking at something familiar. Karen noticed that look. She asked, "Do you two know each other?" The driver did not answer immediately. He looked at me, then turned to Karen. "Mom," he said, "if he has not told you the story behind this truck, then maybe you should hear it." Karen crossed her arms. "I do not care about war stories." The driver shook his head slightly. "But I do." He looked at the truck. "That Humvee burned very fast that day." Karen frowned. "Humvee," he continued, his voice slower. I was trapped inside. The door had been bent by the explosion. Smoke was pouring in. Karen looked at him, clearly annoyed. "What does that have to do with this pickup?" The driver turned toward her. "The man standing in front of you," he pointed at me, "is the one who pulled me out of that burning vehicle." A light breeze passed through the street. No one said a word. Karen looked at me. Her expression changed again. This time it was not contempt. It was confusion. The driver continued speaking. "After that I left the military. I started driving tow trucks." He placed his hand on the side of my truck. "And the first time I saw this pickup, I recognized it immediately." Karen frowned. "Recognized what?" The driver tapped lightly on an old scratch along the edge of the truck bed. "This mark," he said. "It came from Iraq." Karen stood still. He looked directly at her. "This truck is not just an old vehicle. It once pulled burning vehicles off the road. It carried equipment. It carried wounded soldiers." Karen blinked. Several neighbors looked at the old pickup with completely different eyes now. The driver spoke slowly. "If you look at it and only see an ugly old truck, then you are looking at the wrong thing." Karen looked at the truck. Then she looked at me. And for the first time since this whole situation began, she had nothing to say. Karen looked at the truck as if she were truly seeing it for the first time, not as an old piece of metal taking up space in a driveway. but as something carrying a story she did not understand at all. But only a few seconds later, that confusion turned into anger. Karen exhaled sharply. "I do not care where that vehicle has been." Her voice became cold and rigid. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a war museum." A few neighbors frowned slightly. The tow truck driver looked at Karen for a long moment. The anger was gone from his eyes now, replaced by quiet disappointment. Mr. Carter from the HOA board spoke. "Karen," he said slowly, "we already explained this. That truck is not violating any rules." Karen shook her head. "Maybe the rules do not say it clearly, but everyone can see it makes the neighborhood look worse." I looked at her. "Karen." She turned toward me. I spoke calmly. "Do you know how this neighborhood was built?" Karen frowned. "I have lived here for a year." Mr. Harris sighed softly. "Exactly. 1 year." Karen turned toward him. "What is that supposed to mean?" Mr. Harris gestured around the street. "When this neighborhood was built, many of the people living here were veterans." He pointed toward my house. "And the first person who suggested creating the HOA was him." Karen turned back toward me. This time, there was a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. Mr. Carter nodded. "That is correct." Karen spoke quietly. "That cannot be possible." I shrugged. "We wanted this neighborhood to be clean and safe, but we also wanted it to be fair." Karen gave a mocking laugh. "Fair," she said. "Where is the fairness in letting an old truck ruin the entire neighborhood?" A neighbor behind her spoke up. "It is not ruining anything." Another voice added, "It has helped half this neighborhood." Karen spun around. "You are all just protecting your friend." The tow truck driver spoke. "No," he said. "We are simply telling the truth." Karen turned toward him. "You do not live here. You have no right to interfere." The driver shrugged. "Maybe not," he said, "but I am grateful to the man who saved my life." Karen exhaled sharply. "I do not believe those hero stories." The air suddenly felt colder. Mr. Carter looked at Karen for a moment. Then he spoke. "Karen, you called the HOA board here to enforce the rules, correct?" Karen nodded. "Yes." Mr. Carter nodded back. "Then let us talk about the rules." Karen crossed her arms. Finally, Mr. Carter took a set of papers from the leather folder he was carrying. "This is the current HOA rulebook." He flipped through several pages, then stopped. He read slowly. "Vehicles used for work, vehicles used for community service, or vehicles owned by residents may be parked outside the driveway as long as they do not block traffic." Karen stood still. Mr. Carter looked up. "That truck meets every one of those conditions." Karen immediately said, "But it still makes the neighborhood look bad." The gray-haired woman on the board responded, "Appearance is not a legal clause." Karen tightened her grip on her phone. "So calling the tow truck was wrong." Mr. Carter looked at her. "You do not have the authority to order a resident's vehicle to be towed." Karen stayed silent. Mr. Harris added, "And if that vehicle had been towed without an actual violation, the owner would have the right to sue the HOA." Several neighbors exchanged glances. Karen turned toward me. "Would you sue?" I shook my head. "No." Karen seemed slightly surprised. "I do not want to sue anyone. I just want to live here peacefully." Karen looked at me for a few seconds, but that silence did not calm her down. Instead, it made her even more angry. She said, "Then I will bring this to the HOA meeting." Mr. Carter nodded. "You have the right to do that." Karen exhaled heavily. "Good." She turned back toward me. "Do you think this story is over?" I looked at her. "Karen," I said slowly, "I never thought this was a war." Karen gave a cold laugh. "But for me it is." She turned and walked back toward her house. Everyone stood quietly watching her leave. The tow truck was still parked there. My pickup was still sitting in the driveway. Everything seemed like it had ended. But I knew one thing. Karen was never the kind of person who stopped after losing one round. And this story was far from over. 3 days later, an official letter from the HOA was slipped into my mailbox. And the moment I read the first line, I knew Karen had not given up. Notice of HOA rule violation. I stood by the mailbox for a few seconds, the letter still open in my hand. The street remained quiet like every other morning. Birds sat along the trees. A car rolled slowly past the corner, but in my hand was a piece of paper trying to turn my old pickup into a legal problem. I kept reading. Violation of community aesthetic standards. The vehicle must be removed within 7 days. Failure to comply may result in further action by the HOA. I let out a quiet breath. Karen. She could not win with the rules, so she chose another path. I folded the letter and walked slowly toward the driveway. The truck was still there. Old, scratched, ordinary, but now it felt like a small flag in a conflict I never wanted to be part of. Mr. Harris was watering plants in his front yard. He noticed the letter in my hand. They sent it already. I lifted the paper slightly. Yeah. Mr. Harris shook his head. Karen. He said it as if that one word explained everything. Mrs. Linda walked over from across the street. She really did it. I handed her the letter. She read a few lines inside. She is trying to use the aesthetic clause. Mr. Harris spoke immediately. That clause was never meant for vehicles. I nodded. I know. Mr. Harris looked at my pickup. That truck has helped more people than this HOA board ever has. Mrs. Linda handed the letter back to me. She is trying to push you out. I looked at her. I am not going anywhere. She gave a small smile. I know. That afternoon I drove the truck to the small garage behind my house to grab a few tools. When I returned to the driveway, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk. Karen. She stood there with her phone in her hand, as if she had been waiting for me. When I stopped the truck, she walked toward me. Did you receive the letter? Her voice was cold. I turned off the engine, then nodded. And Karen shrugged. Now you have 7 days. I looked at her. 7 days to do what? She pointed at the truck. To remove that thing. I leaned against the truck door. Karen, I said, you know that clause does not apply to this vehicle. She gave a small smile. We will see what the HOA board thinks. I looked at her. They already said what they think. Karen stepped a little closer. Do you think they will always stand on your side? I did not answer. Karen continued. I have spoken with several people in the neighborhood. They do not like that vehicle either. A light wind moved through the street. A few dry leaves rolled across the pavement. I looked directly into her eyes. Karen, you really think this is about the truck? She crossed her arms. Exactly. I shook my head slightly. No. Karen frowned. Then what do you think it is about? I looked at the pickup. That truck had traveled across dusty red roads thousands of miles away from this quiet neighborhood. Then I looked back at Karen. This is about control. Karen said nothing. I continued. You just moved here. You want to prove you have authority. Karen let out a mocking laugh. You think you understand me? I did not answer. Karen stepped back. Fine, she said. Let us wait for the HOA meeting next week. Then we will see who is right. She turned and walked away. I watched her leave. The pickup remained in the driveway. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the faded paint. Karen believed she had finally found a way, but there was something she still did not understand. HOA rules are not just words written in a book. They are the history of this neighborhood. And I am part of that history. Next week's HOA meeting. Karen believed that was where she would win, but she did not know something. Inside that meeting room, there would be people who clearly remembered who built this neighborhood from the very beginning. The HOA meeting that evening was more crowded than any meeting in years, and Karen walked into the room as if she had already won before the meeting even began. The neighborhood community room was brightly lit. Folding chairs were arranged in several rows. Low conversations filled the room as people gradually stepped inside. Normal HOA meetings were usually quiet. A few people attending. A few reports about lawns, trash bins, fences, but tonight was different. The news had spread quickly through the neighborhood. Karen, the truck, and the violation letter. I walked into the room holding a paper cup of coffee. A few people nodded to greet me. Mr. Harris raised a hand. Mrs. Linda gave me a small smile. The atmosphere was not tense, but it was heavy. Karen sat in the front row, her back straight, a stack of papers neatly placed in front of her. She turned to look at me as I walked in. Her eyes were full of confidence, as if she had been preparing for this moment all week. I sat in the back row, next to Mr. Harris. He whispered, "She sent emails to almost the entire neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. Mr. Harris nodded, saying your truck is hurting property values. I smiled faintly. Karen did not just want to win. She wanted the entire neighborhood on her side. The meeting began when Mr. Carter stood at the front table. He tapped lightly on the table. "Let us begin." The room fell silent. Mr. Carter looked around. "Tonight, there is an issue that many residents have expressed concern about." Karen immediately stood up. She did not wait to be called. "Yes," she said. "I want to talk about the truck parked in his driveway." She pointed directly toward me. Several people in the room turned to look. Karen stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "We have a beautiful community, organized, with standards." She raised a printed photograph. "This is the truck I am referring to." Several people looked at the photo. Karen continued, "This vehicle does not meet the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood." I remained seated. Karen kept speaking. "If we allow vehicles like this to exist here." She paused briefly. "Then tomorrow there could be many more." She turned toward the HOA board. "We must protect the value of our community." Several people in the room nodded slightly. Karen noticed. Her confidence grew stronger. She looked toward me. "A community has rules, and rules must be enforced." Mr. Carter spoke calmly. "Karen, we already discussed this matter." Karen shook her head. "No, we did not discuss it thoroughly." She raised another sheet of paper. "This is the aesthetic clause." I stood up. The room stirred slightly. Karen turned toward me. "Good," she said. "You should say something too." I walked a few steps forward. Not rushed, not tense, just calm. I looked around the room. Many familiar faces. People who had lived in this neighborhood since the early days. I spoke. "I do not want to argue." Karen crossed her arms. "But you are still here." I nodded. "Because this story is not only about the truck." Karen gave a cold laugh. "Then what is it about?" I looked toward the HOA board. Then I looked back at the room. "Do you all remember when this neighborhood was first built?" Several people nodded. Mr. Harris said, "I remember." I continued. "Back then we wanted a neighborhood that was clean, but also a neighborhood where people helped each other." Karen interrupted. "That has nothing to do with the vehicle." I looked at her. "It does." Then I looked back at everyone. That truck helped repair homes, move furniture, pull cars out of muddy ditches. Someone in the back spoke loudly. "That is right." Another person said, "It helped me last winter." Karen exhaled sharply. "That is not the issue." I nodded. "You are right. It is not." I looked directly at her. "The issue is that you believe the HOA exists to control people." Karen opened her mouth. I continued. "But the HOA was created to protect the community." The room fell silent. Mr. Carter spoke. "I believe we have heard enough." Karen turned toward him. "So what are you going to do?" Mr. Carter looked down at the papers in front of him. Then he looked up. "The HOA board has reviewed the violation letter." Karen leaned slightly forward. Mr. Carter spoke each word clearly. "And we have decided that letter is not valid." Karen froze. Mr. Carter continued. "The truck does not violate any HOA rule." Karen stood still for a few seconds. Then she said, "Then I will take this matter to a higher authority." Mr. Carter looked at her. "Karen," he said, "before you do that, there is something you should know." Karen frowned. Mr. Carter spoke slowly. "That violation letter was not sent by the HOA board." The room suddenly fell completely silent. Karen blinked. Mr. Carter continued. "It was sent from an administrative account that only a board member can access." Karen stood motionless. And, for the first time that evening, the confidence on her face disappeared completely. Karen was the only person in the room with access to that account. And in that moment, the entire room understood what had just happened. The air inside the community room suddenly became heavy. No more murmurs, no more chairs shifting, Only a long silence stretched between everyone. Karen stood frozen at the front. Her face had gone pale. She looked at Mr. Carter, then at the other members of the HOA board, as if waiting for someone to deny it. No one did. Karen shook her head. No. Her voice sounded dry. I only sent the notice according to the proper procedure. Mr. Carter looked at her calmly. No, Karen, he said. That notice was never approved by the board. The gray-haired woman opened the folder in front of her. We checked the system, she said. That email was sent from the administrative account at 3:20 in the afternoon on Monday. Karen stood still. The woman continued. And only one person logged into that account at that time. Karen. A few people in the room began exchanging glances. Not curious glances anymore, but disappointed ones. Karen looked around the room. She saw neighbors who used to greet her every morning. Now they were looking at her differently. The friendliness was gone. Karen spoke. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood. Mr. Harris stood up. Karen, he said slowly. Protecting the neighborhood does not mean abusing authority. Karen turned toward him. I did not abuse anything. Mrs. Linda spoke from the back of the room. Karen. Her voice was gentle but clear. You called the tow truck. You sent the violation notice. You told everyone that the HOA board supported you. Karen stiffened. Mr. Carter exhaled slowly. Karen, he said. We had a brief discussion before the meeting began. Karen looked at him. And according to HOA regulations, Mr. Carter paused for a moment. The board has the authority to suspend a member's access if the system is used improperly. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mr. Carter continued. Starting tonight, your administrative access has been temporarily suspended. A quiet sigh could be heard somewhere in the room. Karen shook her head. You cannot do that. The gray-haired woman replied. We just did. Karen looked around the room once again, but no one stood up to defend her. Not a single person. The meeting room that Karen believed would prove her authority had now become the place where everyone saw the opposite. Karen tightened her grip on the papers in her hand. She turned toward me. All of this, she said, is because of that truck. I looked at her. No, I said. It is not because of the truck. Karen remained silent. I continued. It is because of how you treat people. The room fell quiet again. Karen stood there for a few more seconds. Then finally she turned around and walked quickly out of the room. The door closed behind her. A short, hollow sound. The meeting continued for a few more minutes. But everyone knew the most important part was already over. When I stepped outside the meeting room, it was already dark. A cool night breeze moved through the quiet street. My pickup was still sitting in the driveway like it always had. Old, scratched, but steady. The tow truck driver from the other day was standing across the street, leaning against his vehicle. He smiled when he saw me. I heard the meeting was interesting. I shrugged. Just another HOA meeting. He looked at the truck. That vehicle is still exactly where it belongs. I nodded. Yes. We stood there quietly for a few seconds, looking at the calm street. He said, You know, I think Karen learned a lesson today. I looked at the pickup. Maybe, I said, or maybe not. But at least this neighborhood remembered something important. A community is not built on power. It is built on respect. If you have ever lived in an HOA community and dealt with a Karen like this, share your story in the comments. And if you enjoy HOA karma stories like this one, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story.